Welcome, everyone. Today, my guest is Kevin Johnson, President and CEO of Starbucks. Welcome, Kevin.
Well, good morning, Frank. Thanks for having me join you this morning.
It's great to have you here. I wanted to start off with a question about race and cultural sensitivity training. So Starbucks has a fair amount of experience in this area. Based on those experiences, what types of training have been most successful?
Well, certainly with 32,000 stores around the world serving over 100 million customer occasions a week, we work hard to create a warm, welcoming environment in all of our stores. And, I think 2 years ago, it was a fairly public incident that happened in one of our stores in Philadelphia, where on that particular day, we failed as a company to create that warm and welcoming experience for all of our customers. And in many ways, we've been focused on training around either conscious or unconscious bias, whether it's race, gender, a variety of different things. And we've made a lot of progress. I think we found in a partnership that we have with ASU, we've created a curriculum that can be found out on the web under To Be Welcoming, and that has served us well. But I think the most powerful learning experience is what we call courageous conversations or listening sessions, where within Starbucks we create a safe place for Starbucks partners. We call everyone that works at Starbucks a partner. A safe place for partners to share their stories. And it's when you sit side by side with your fellow partners and you have a Starbucks partner share what it's like being Black in America and some of the experiences that they've gone through. And when you get to that level of vulnerability and storytelling, it really makes that connection and does it in a way that really creates the type of empathy and compassion for people who have suffered through racial injustice or racial incidents that kind of takes us all to the same level of humanity to understand how to really put yourself in someone else's shoes. And so I think those listening sessions, those courageous conversations are the most powerful way we have found to really create that safe space so that people could share their experiences and really understand.
That's great to hear, because we're working hard here at the Foster School to create more of those types of spaces and those types of conversations when we roll into the fall quarter next year.
Yeah.
What kind of trainings have you done that didn't quite turn out the way you had hoped?
Well, we're constantly trying new things, and we do what we call pour-over sessions, which we bring in outside speakers to help share kind of their perspective on some of these topics. And we broadcast those across all of our stores so that partners can engage and participate in those. I think that the thing that's important is that this is a journey. There's not like, here's the formula of the 3 things you do. You have to continue to work on this constantly. And I think the things that haven't worked is when people have an expectation that you go through one class or one set of training and you're done. Yeah. You're never done. It's part of the journey that that you have to go on, and it's continuous. And so the things that don't work are if you think, hey, here's the one class that's going to fix everything. That doesn't work.
Yeah, it's an interesting point. We've learned that in academia because we used to teach ethics in a class and then say, go out and be ethical. And what we found is you've got to integrate it throughout the entire curriculum to get people thinking all the time about these sorts of topics. I think that's a really important point.
Yeah, I agree. I agree with that. I think that's the right way to think about it.
Starbucks is famous for tailoring its stores to fit the neighborhoods that it serves, to be that third place after home and work that people go to connect. Given the diverse cultures that exist across America, how does Starbucks research and create those unique spaces for each of those different cultures?
Well, certainly, Frank, we operate our stores in 82 markets around the world. So we've got stores in over 80 countries and different continents with people that speak different languages, practice different religions, different cultures. And the thing, as I travel around the world and visit these stores, one of the things that I really enjoy doing is just do a roundtable with Starbucks partners, maybe 5, 6, 7 partners, where each of them shares their life journey and what brought them to Starbucks, and we have these conversations. And, you know, the most interesting thing that I find is that the Starbucks experience is really grounded in humanity. It's, you know, the mission to inspire and nurture the human spirit, one person, one cup, one neighborhood at a time. And when you think about the one thing that every single human being on this planet has in common, it's the human experience.
Yeah.
You know, we've all felt joy and sorrow. We have all struggled to overcome challenges. We all have our own fears and self-doubts. And when you get down to that level, it really is, that third place is really about creating human connection. And as human beings, we thrive on that. We get energy from one another. You know, it's how we overcome our challenges. It's how we celebrate our accomplishments. It's that human connection that is just the common thread throughout everything we do. Now, when we build a store in a certain market, we do try to build that store in a way that represents the culture. For example, in China, we build stores in China. We use local Chinese artisan craftsmen to build that store, but we display Chinese artworks and things that are representative and celebrate that particular culture and that particular market. So there's one thing that is in common around the world, and that is this mission that's grounded in the human experience, and it comes to life in 32,000 stores, and then each one of those stores is a snowflake, and we design each one unique to that particular location, that particular culture, and that's sort of how we balance creating a Starbucks experience around the world.
Yeah, I think that's such a beautiful way to say it. We're trying to do the same thing on campus, right? I talk a lot about building community and then building connections within that community and beyond. And that's exactly what you're talking about in the stores.
Yeah, I mean, universities are a great example of this. I mean, it is where, you know, people connect, and it's where they share ideas and sort of the joy of being a part of humanity. And you create that on your campus, and you create that with all the students that engage with faculty. So I think it's very similar.
Yeah. In the face of a pandemic that's forcing us to socially distance and avoid public gatherings, how does Starbucks continue as that third place, that important gathering spot?
Yeah, well, you know, it's interesting. I've been, since middle of January, have been working to navigate the COVID-19 situation around the world. Middle of January is when we first had to start shutting down stores in China as the virus began to spread, and then, you know, around the world we've gone through the whole phase of shutting down stores and then reopening stores. And the interesting thing is, you know, even in the United States, when we closed access to our stores and just kept drive-throughs open, we'd have lines of cars around the block. Customers still wanted to come get their Starbucks. And in many cases, as they came through that drive-through, they had an opportunity to say good morning or say hello to their favorite barista who handcrafted their beverage. And so, you know, even in the periods where we had to eliminate seating in our stores and congregating in our stores, customers still come, and they order, you know, a lot of times they order on the mobile app, and they come pick up their beverage and their food. And even just that moment to say good morning or say hi to someone familiar from Starbucks is part of that third place experience. It's about feeling a part of a community. And Starbucks stores, you know, we really are, every one of them are a part of that local community. And so it still is a hub for people to feel like they're part of something bigger than themselves.
Yeah, I witnessed that, Kevin, early in the shutdown when I was on the east side. I cycle early in the mornings on the weekends, and I was coming upon an intersection, and I saw all these taillights, and I'm thinking, oh, there must have been an accident or something. And it wasn't an accident. It was all the cars in line to get the Starbucks from the drive-thru. It was the only Starbucks open for a wide geographic area.
Yeah, and it was be you know, how long, you know, a customer would just say, I'm going to sit here for 20 minutes to be able to get my order and get my Starbucks. And, you know, we appreciated that. We're delighted now. We have, most of our stores are open, and we have mobile order for pickup in the stores, or delivery plus the drive-throughs. Now customers can come in the stores and order for to take things out of the stores. But it does demonstrate, I think, in many ways, the power of the brand. And, you know, in many ways, it's the Starbucks partners that work in those stores that really bring that brand to life. And I tell you, I'm so proud of how my Starbucks partners around the world have shown up throughout this entire global pandemic, and how we've had to shelter in place, we've had to close stores, we've had to work with the CDC to create safe protocols to reopen. We've reopened in a safe way, and we're re-engaging customers, and we're doing it in a way where we monitor and adapt. And I give all the credit to those partners who proudly wear the green apron.
Mhm. My next question is about those partners, because they have a reputation for being passionate about the communities that they serve. How has this culture changed at Starbucks over the last couple of years?
Well, Frank, see, I think about this, Starbucks was founded in 1971. So 49-year-old company. We're about to celebrate our 50th anniversary as a company. And I think the most important aspect of Starbucks is we are grounded in a mission around humanity and a set of values for how we carry ourselves and how we run the company that really creates what you see happening in our stores. These are partners who are proud to work in service of others. They are partners who want to be a part of something bigger than themselves. Mm-hmm. We are a company that that has a purpose that goes far beyond the pursuit of profit. And I think going forward, you're going to see more and more for-profit businesses pursuing an agenda that goes beyond the pursuit of profit, whether it's work that has to be done around environmental sustainability, or work that has to be done around racial justice and creating a more equitable environment for all citizens to thrive and succeed. And Starbucks partners, they come to Starbucks because they are emotionally connected to that kind of a mission, and they want to be associated with a company that stands for more than just driving a profit.
And we've noticed that same thing on campus, Kevin. Students, as they're coming into the business school, are asking about our values. They're making value-based decisions. And then as they go work for companies, that's one of the first questions they ask. It's not how much am I going to make? It's what are your values? And I want to make sure I'm comfortable with my values matching your values.
Yeah, and I think, you see the younger generations, that is a very important thing to them. And I actually think, many of the problems that we face in society, we can't just look to governments and public sector to solve all those problems. We have to get involved as citizens, but I also think that for-profit businesses have to play a bigger role and responsibility in doing good in this world. And I think by doing that, that enables us to attract the kind of Starbucks partners who create that great experience for our customers, and it's part of what fuels the company, basically.
How do you, as a leader, integrate into that culture so that you can make an impact on the communities that you serve around the world?
Well, my job is pretty simple. I get up every morning and I work in service of 500,000 Starbucks partners who proudly wear the green apron. And I get energy from them, spending time with them, and so much of my responsibility is, are we setting the right strategy that enables them to do the great work that they do, not just, creating that great Starbucks experience, but also having the kind of positive impact in the communities that we're a part of. Oftentimes we'll pick, either national or global agendas that we're going to drive, but we also then empower store managers and our partners in the store to pick things that are local to their community. So a global agenda might be our Planet Positive sustainability aspiration, where we aspire to be a resource positive company where we give more than we take from the planet. Now that's going to take many decades to achieve. Nationally in the United States, for example, we're focused on food insecurity in a partnership with Feeding America and helping get food to those who are hungry. And then in each particular store, they may be doing something that's very relevant and important to their local community. So this happens throughout the company at all levels, and it is part of the fabric of Starbucks.
It's great to hear that it goes up and down the chain of command, if you will, from the very top down to the people that are doing the work in your stores, the partners.
Yep.
I want to switch to talk about your board experience. So you joined Starbucks board in 2009. How has the board changed since then to meet the business and societal issues that Starbucks faces today?
Well, I'd say one significant change since 2009 and today is, we've gone through one of the most significant transitions any company will go through, and that is transitioning from a founder-led to a founder-inspired company.
Mhm.
And, in many ways, that's where I've dedicated, the last 5+ years, of my life to helping make that transition as smooth as possible and set the company up, basically for the next 50 years. And so, the board has also had to evolve with that as well as we made that transition. I think certainly in that transition, the things I think are important, number one is to have the wisdom to know what to honor and preserve from the past, and the courage to boldly reimagine the future. And so if you think about it, if all we do is hang on to the past and status quo, and we don't recognize that things in the world are changing and evolving, the world will pass us by. And so things like embracing digital and creating a mobile app that's used by tens of millions of people in the United States, and tens of millions of customers in China as well, and around the world, that complements the experience we create in our stores. That's an example of embracing and reimagining the future of the business. But at the same time, we have stayed true to the mission, the values, and the guiding principles that created this great company. And so the board has to have that same balance that the management team does, which is really, let's make sure we're honoring and retaining those things that are most important to the future of the company, while at the same time being willing to step back and reimagine and reinvent the company to adapt in a rapidly changing world.
Sounds like it's really, you have to have a rock solid foundation based on vision, mission, and values, and then looking to the future. You need to have that growth mindset and always be saying, how can we be better tomorrow than we are today?
That's right. And if all we did was say, hey, well, mission, values, culture, that doesn't matter, we're just going to go reinvent everything, we'll lose our way. And
Yeah.
you've seen companies do that. And by the same time, if all we do is hang on to the past and we don't reinvent, the world passes us by. So the only way to be what I call an enduring company, a company that, like, we're going to celebrate our 50th anniversary of Starbucks, the founding of Starbucks, in March of 2021. And, my vision and my dream is to think about the centennial anniversary that will happen in 2071. Now, I won't be here for that, but, my children and my grandchildren will be. Building an enduring company requires this balance, the wisdom to know what to honor and preserve, and the most important thing in that is mission, culture, values, and the willingness to boldly reimagine the future.
I look forward to that celebration next March. At some point in their futures, many of Foster's students will sit on a for-profit or not-for-profit board. What advice would you give them to help them maximize or succeed in that experience?
Well, I think, for board positions for directors, the things I find most valuable and the most successful directors are ones that are willing to take the time to listen and learn and understand the business, through the lens of the management team and through the lens of being a customer, and then, knowing when and how to offer their suggestions or their ideas in a constructive way that helps support the management team. Clearly, the management team, we have responsibility for running the company and making the decisions. The board's responsibility is a governance responsibility, and there's a tight connection between management and the board when it comes to shaping long-term strategy and getting getting the ideas and the thoughtfulness. So, really talented board members are good at asking questions. They're good at listening and understanding. And then they're very good at the way that they offer, ideas and new suggestions and support the management team who's running the company.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. It's essentially being present. You need to be present in the context organization you're helping, and then you ask great questions and you provide meaningful feedback.
Yeah, that's right. And I think, it's sort of like being a lifelong learner means that, you're constantly pushing yourself outside the comfort zone to learn and listen and experience new things. And, that's true in my role and as part of the management team. It's also true, in the role as a director on the board, is that, constantly learning, adapting, and growing as both as an individual, but then contributing, your ideas, your thoughts, and that starts by asking great questions and learning.
My next question is about your personal leadership journey. So what is one significant mistake you made that eventually turned out to be a valuable learning opportunity?
Hmm. Um, one mistake I made, earlier in my career was I got I launched and built a strategy and then launched too many initiatives, too many things that the organization wasn't prepared to do.
Hmm.
And sometimes less is more. So the learning from that is that by really sharpening the focus, prioritizing things, but really focusing on the most important things, and then putting all of your execution discipline behind those things,
Yeah.
is far better than launching a number of things, launching too many things that the organization can't digest. And so, it's a lesson. In a lot of ways, I think about my role is sort of three things. It's number one, it's the culture and the talent that we have in the company. It's the strategy we're pursuing, and it's how we then operationalize that strategy to bring it to life.
Mm-hmm.
And if you have too broad of a strategy that's not sharp and focused, you just won't make the progress and have the impact that you need.
It sounds like a focus on quality over quantity.
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that requires you to prioritize. And prioritizing is as much saying, here are the great ideas that we're not going to pursue.
Yeah.
And that's a hard thing to do. Like if you see 10 great ideas, well, let's go do all 10. But you know what? You'll do, maybe you pick 10, but you don't do any of them very well. It's a lot better to do the top 3 to 5 and do them really well and have impact. And then once you get to that point, you might say, okay, now I'm going to add, idea number 6 and 7. And now we weave those in. So a lot of it has to do with prioritization and sequencing of what you're asking the organization to go do. And you can't get out over your skis if you just say, hey, here's 10 great ideas, let's go do all of them. And all of a sudden you end up saying, well, we tried to do all 10 and we didn't do very well on any of them.
Yeah, and I found it's really important. So once you do prioritize and decide on those 3 or 4, to explain to people why you're pursuing those 3 and 4 and why you decided not to pursue the others, so that everyone understands why we're heading in this direction.
Absolutely. I mean, that communication is really critical because, you think a lot of times the responsibility that you have is to sort of look at the landscape of decisions that you have to make, pick the ones that you're going to prioritize, but then communicate why you picked the ones you picked. If Starbucks partners understand, well, here's why we picked the top 3 or 4. They understand that. So, for example, 82 markets. We're in 82 markets around the world, but we were very clear. We say, the 2 lead growth markets are the U.S. and China. And that's a strategy decision. It says, look, we're going to put our energy behind the U.S. and China. Now, we love all of the other 80 markets. And I described to them, I said, but look, this is like a Peloton. The 2 front bikes in the Peloton are the US and China, and all the rest of us, we just draft right behind them. So if we get those right, the entire company succeeds, and partners understand that.
Yeah, anyone who knows Pelotons knows that if they get the front of the Peloton right, the whole Peloton goes faster and more efficient. So that's a great analogy.
That's right. So I use that analogy. That's helped me kind of just these are 2 large markets that are growing and great opportunity. So that's an example of prioritizing and saying, look, here's the strategy. Strategy is these are the 2 lead growth markets. Let's get those right. Everyone else drafts right behind them, and we win.
Yeah, that's great. Kevin, if you were conducting interviews like I am to learn about leadership and share that knowledge with our community, who would you interview?
Well, let me see. First, I've had the privilege of getting to know Bob Gates, who was Secretary of Defense, and he served many presidents. There is a lot to learn from Secretary Gates, and he's worked in service of our country for so many years, and he's had to lead through complex situations across multiple administrations. I think Bob is a very wise, and has got many stories and many insights that I find very interesting. So I'm a big fan of Secretary Gates. That certainly would be one. Another person I don't know, but have sort of been following a bit is Steve Kerr, the coach of Golden State Warriors. I always find basketball, as growing up, I was a student of John Wooden. And I just love the way Coach Wooden just quietly figured out how to build a team where you have big personalities and this great talent, but they sort of work harmoniously, where it's not about the ego, it's more about the team. And how do you get, and I think, the Golden State Warriors are sort of in that class, and I'd be interested to see what we could learn from Steve.
Well, I think one thing that he does so well is he asked his teams to pursue simplistic excellence. So break it down to the fundamentals, do those exceptionally well, and then don't worry so much about what others are doing.
No, that's right. Coach Wooden, the story I loved about him was the first day of practice every year, he'd bring all the players in and he would teach them how to put on their socks and how to lace up their shoes. And you might think, he's got Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and he's teaching them all how to put on their socks and lace up their shoes. But he would explain, look, if you don't put your socks on correctly, if you have a fold or crease in your sock, you're going to get a blister in practice. If you get a blister in practice, you're not going to be able to perform up to your best. If you don't lace up your shoes and tie them properly, you could get a loose shoelace and trip and injure yourself. So these are things you can control. Just learn how to do it and be disciplined in doing it. It's just a great example of a leadership lesson around, operational excellence, around the things that you can control, and just figure out how to do a great job on those.
Yeah, that's a wonderful story. Last question, Kevin. What do you order when you go to Starbucks?
Oh, okay. My morning ritual is a short triple espresso with just a splash of hot water. So technically that would be an Americano, but it's mostly a triple espresso. Then I come into the office, lately I've been working at home like many others, but then I make a French press, and I usually make a French press of either Sumatra or Guatemala, Antigua coffee. And my afternoon beverage would be a flat white. So that's kind of my ritual.
Our tastes are very similar. So my drink of choice is a doppio con panna, which is just espresso with a dollop of whipped cream on top. And then I like Sumatra as drip coffee as well. So
yeah, very good. Wow, you got a good coffee talent, Frank. I like that. Love that.
Well, thank you, Kevin. I appreciate you joining me today.
Well, it was my pleasure. I enjoyed our conversation, and now I know a little bit more about your coffee ritual too. So fantastic.
Well, the next time we meet, we'll have to have coffee together.
Would look forward to it. Thank you.
Be safe, Kevin.
You too.